He was gone, and yet the air in that church was heavier than his coffin. I remember standing there, my black dress clinging to me like it belonged to someone else, my shoes sinking into the carpet with every step. People whispered, soft enough to pretend they were respectful, loud enough so I could feel the weight of their words pressing against my back. My husband Richard had been admired, envied even. And now he was gone. All that was left was me, trembling inside a body that no longer felt mine. I kept thinking, at least I still have our home, our life, the memories we built together. That thought was the only thin thread keeping me from collapsing. I clung to it the way a drowning woman clings to a piece of driftwood. When the priest's voice echoed through the space, it was as though he was speaking to everyone but me. His words blurred into a low hum, like bees buzzing somewhere far away. What I heard instead were the whispers. Poor Anna. What will she do now? She'll be fine. Richard left her everything. Their pity coated me in something sticky, something I wanted to wipe off but couldn't. I stared at the coffin. Smooth wood, polished to perfection, hiding the body of the man I thought I knew better than anyone. My heart was screaming, but my face stayed composed. I had to. For appearances, for dignity, for myself. Then I saw it. A look. It lasted no longer than a second, but it cut through me like a blade. Two women in the corner. One leaned into the other, lips brushing an ear, and then both turned their eyes toward me. There was something in that glance. Not pity. Something else. And for the first time, I felt a shadow of doubt. The service ended. People lined up, faces blurred together, murmuring the same tired words. I'm so sorry for your loss, Anna. He was such a good man, Anna. My hands shook as they clasped theirs, one after another like some endless ritual. I wanted to scream. Do you really know what kind of man he was? But I kept silent. When I finally stepped outside, the sun was cruelly bright, as if the world had no right to mourn. The cemetery grass was damp under my heels, the smell of flowers almost suffocating. My son Daniel touched my arm, his voice low, careful. You need rest, Mother. I nodded, though I felt like I would never rest again. Still, I whispered to myself, at least I have our home, our life. But even as the words left my lips, something deep inside me stirred. A warning. A fracture in the picture I had painted of Richard and me. I pushed it away, telling myself it was just grief, nothing more. I was wrong. The lawyer's office smelled of paper and polish, the kind of scent that belongs to rooms where truth is spoken in whispers. I sat in the leather chair, my hands folded on my lap, though they wouldn't stop trembling. Daniel sat beside me, quiet, his face pale but steady. Across the desk, Mr. Harris, our family lawyer for more than 20 years, adjusted his glasses and looked at me with that professional calm that hides something darker. He reached for the envelope. A simple white envelope, unremarkable, and yet it felt like a weapon. My heart thudded against my ribs as he slid his finger along the seal. Every movement felt too slow, unbearable in its ceremony. The paper tore, and I swear the sound sliced through me. Anna, he said softly, this won't be easy. My mouth was dry, my voice cracked when I whispered, just read it, please. He cleared his throat, eyes scanning the page. I watched his lips move, forming words that at first made sense. Formalities, introductions, the kind of language wills are made of. Then, the words shifted. My mind snagged on them like a dress catching on a nail. I, Richard Coleman, hereby leave the entirety of my estate, including the house, the accounts, and the car, to... There was a pause. Mr. Harris blinked, hesitated. He glanced at me, then back to the page. To Margaret Turner. The room vanished. For a moment I couldn't even hear. Just silence, a roaring silence that filled my head. I thought maybe I had misheard, that grief had twisted the sound. But Daniel leaned forward, his voice sharp. What? Who is that? My chest tightened. My hands clutched the arms of the chair. Margaret Turner, Mr. Harris repeated more carefully this time, as though the repetition would make it real. I shook my head. No, that's wrong. That can't be right. I'm his wife. I'm Anna Coleman. He wouldn't. The words dissolved into air. Mr. Harris folded his hands. Anna, I know this is a shock, but it is legal. Everything is in her name. Daniel's fists slammed onto the desk. He abandoned his family for some stranger. This is madness. I sat frozen, staring at the paper in the lawyer's hands, as if it were a knife still dripping with blood. Margaret Turner, a name that meant nothing, a name that now owned everything. The grief I carried from Richard's death shattered like glass. In its place came something jagged, burning, betrayal. It spread through me, hotter than tears, sharper than rage. And in that moment I realized my husband's death was not the end of my suffering. It was only the beginning. When I opened the front door that evening, the house did not welcome me. It stood there, silent, waiting, heavy with secrets. For 40 years, this place had been my refuge, the stage of my life with Richard. But now every shadow, every corner seemed to whisper his lies. I set my purse on the hallway table and heard the faint clatter of keys against the wood. That sound, once ordinary, suddenly felt like a scream in the silence. I stood still, listening. The air carried his scent, aftershave and tobacco lingering, mocking me. It was as if Richard was still here, alive, breathing somewhere in the next room. And yet, the truth screamed louder. He was gone, and everything he left was not mine. I walked into the living room. The armchair where he used to sit still held the imprint of his body. The fireplace with our framed photographs now looked staged, like props in a play I no longer believed in. I stared at one picture, Richard with his arm around me, smiling, proud. My own smile was wide, foolish, innocent. I wanted to tear the photo from the frame, but my hands refused. Instead, I whispered, "How could you, Richard? How could you do this to me?" I climbed the stairs slowly, each step heavier than the last. Our bedroom door creaked as I pushed it open. The bed was neatly made, though I hadn't slept since the funeral. His clothes hung in the closet, suits, ties, shirts, all lined up as though he might return any moment. I pulled one jacket down, pressed it to my face. His scent was strong, alive. My knees buckled. I sank onto the floor, clutching the fabric as sobs broke free from me. But grief no longer stood alone. It was poisoned now, mixed with betrayal. Every memory in this house was suspect. Every laugh, every touch, every promise. Was it all a lie? Was I sharing him unknowingly with this Margaret Turner? The thought crawled under my skin, unbearable. I stumbled into his study, flicked on the lamp. Papers, books, his handwriting scrawled across notes. The room that once felt like his sanctuary now felt like a crime scene. I searched the desk drawers without knowing what I was looking for. I only knew I needed answers. Receipts, envelopes, scraps of correspondence, proof that my life had been built on shifting sand. The silence of the house pressed down on me, louder than any noise. I had never felt so alone, and yet I could feel him everywhere, in the scent, in the shadows, in the betrayal etched into the walls. This was no longer my home. It was his monument of lies. I pulled the desk drawer open with hands that shook more than I wanted to admit. The metal handle was cool against my skin, but the papers inside burned me with their silence. Bills, notes, envelopes. Ordinary things, yet suddenly suspicious. My breath came shallow as I sifted through them, each page like a betrayal waiting to be discovered. There it was, a receipt. Dated only 2 months before his death. A hotel in another town, not far, but far enough to keep it hidden. The signature at the bottom made my stomach twist. Richard's handwriting, smooth, confident, undeniable. I dropped it onto the desk as though it had stung me. I reached for another paper, an envelope without a stamp, folded neatly as though it had been tucked away on purpose. Inside was a letter. Not long, just a few lines. His handwriting again. Margaret, thank you for last night. You make me feel alive. My throat closed. Alive. That word echoed in me like a cruel joke. He had been alive with her, while with me he had been… what? Performing? Pretending? I couldn't breathe. I pushed the chair back, but my eyes caught something else, a small photograph half hidden beneath a stack of old bank statements. I pulled it free with trembling fingers. A woman. Not young, not glamorous, but real. Her hair swept back, her smile soft. Margaret. I didn't know her, and yet I hated her instantly because she had lived in the space I thought was mine alone. On the back, in Richard's handwriting again, just one word. Forever. The sound that came out of me was not a cry, not a scream, but something in between. I pressed the photo to my chest and then flung it across the room. It landed face down on the rug, but I could still feel her eyes on me, her presence invading my home, my marriage, my memories. I sank into Richard's chair, the leather cold beneath me. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst. Questions tore at me, each sharper than the last. How long had this been going on? Did everyone know? Was I the fool who smiled at dinners, held his hand in public while he carried her in his heart? I pressed my palms against my temples, trying to quiet the storm in my head, but there was no quiet anymore, only the echo of her name written in his hand, etched now into my soul. Margaret Turner. That night I realized the truth was no longer buried with Richard. It was alive in these scraps of paper, waiting to destroy me piece by piece, and it had only just begun. The next morning I forced myself out of the house, though every step felt like dragging chains. I told myself I needed air, I needed to see people, I needed reassurance. But the moment I stepped into the world, I understood something had changed. The looks were different now. Pity, curiosity, whispers that broke off the moment I turned my head. At the grocery store, Mrs. Whitman from next door approached me with a face too sweet, too careful. "Anna, dear, how are you holding up?" Her hand lingered on my arm longer than it needed to, her eyes darting away as if she carried a secret she didn't want to share. "I'm fine," I lied, forcing my lips into a smile. But then she added with a sigh, "Richard was such a complicated man." That word, complicated, landed like a stone. Before I could ask, she hurried off, pretending to remember she had forgotten the milk. Later that afternoon, I stopped by the small cafe Richard and I used to visit. The owner, Samuel, gave me coffee on the house, but his wife wouldn't meet my eyes. I caught her whispering to a customer, shaking her head just slightly, as though my very presence confirmed some rumor already floating through town. I began to feel it everywhere, shadows in people's voices, pauses that carried more weight than words. When I asked directly, most of them put on a mask. No, Anna, I had no idea. But their faces betrayed them. Some knew something. Some had suspected, and all of them now looked at me differently. Not as the grieving widow, but as the woman who had been deceived. It was Daniel who finally said what I feared most. That evening, at the kitchen table, he leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Mother, people are talking. They say father had another life. That maybe you chose not to see it." The words pierced deeper than any rumor. Chose not to see it. As though my blindness had been my own doing. Shame coiled around me heavier than grief. I wasn't just betrayed. I was exposed. Naked in front of neighbors, friends, even my own son. When I went to bed that night, I couldn't close my eyes. The whispers followed me into the dark, and for the first time, I wondered if Richard's betrayal was not just his secret, but a truth the whole world had known. Except me. It happened on a grey afternoon, the kind where the sky presses low and the air feels too heavy to breathe. I had almost convinced myself she was a shadow, a name on a paper, a cruel trick of ink and memory. But then I saw her. Margaret Turner. I was walking back from the pharmacy when I noticed a woman stepping out of a car across the street. Something about the way she moved, hesitant, deliberate, made me stop. She wasn't young, not some shining beauty who could explain away the madness of Richard's choices. She was in her 50s, her hair streaked with silver, her shoulders slightly hunched, as though carrying invisible burdens. She wore a plain coat, the kind you wouldn't notice in a crowd. And yet I couldn't look away. For a moment I doubted myself. Could this really be her? But then she turned her head, and I saw it, that face, the same soft smile from the photograph hidden in Richard's desk. Margaret, the woman who now carried my husband's promises like stolen jewels. My legs went weak. I clutched the railing of a shop window, watching her as though she were some apparition. She didn't look cruel. She didn't look like a thief of lives. She looked ordinary. And that, somehow, was worse, because it meant Richard's betrayal wasn't about temptation or vanity or some wild passion. It was about choice. Deliberate, steady choice. I followed her without meaning to, my feet moving on their own. She carried a bag of groceries, paused to greet someone she clearly knew. Her laugh reached me across the street, low, warm, unremarkable. A sound Richard must have heard countless times, a sound he had chosen over mine. Finally she glanced in my direction. Our eyes met, just for a second. Her smile faltered, her steps slowed. Recognition flickered there, sharp and undeniable. She knew who I was. She knew me. And that meant she had lived all these years with the knowledge of my existence, while I lived blind to hers. I turned away quickly, heart hammering, shame rising in my throat like bile. I wanted to shout her name, to demand answers right there in the street, but the words never left my lips. Instead, I walked away, faster and faster, as if I could outrun the weight of her face burned into my mind. That night, I sat by the window staring into the dark. Her image replayed over and over, the plain coat, the streaks of silver, the knowing eyes. She wasn't what I expected, and because of that, the betrayal cut even deeper. Richard hadn't been lured. He had chosen her, and in choosing her, he had chosen to betray me. I don't know what gave me the courage to face her. Maybe it was the sleepless nights, the gnawing questions that chewed through every memory I thought I could trust. Maybe it was the way her eyes had locked with mine that afternoon, as if she'd been waiting for the moment to come. Either way, I found myself standing at her doorstep, my hand frozen over the brass knocker, my chest tight with rage and dread. The door opened before I even touched it. Margaret stood there, her face pale, her eyes steady. She didn't look surprised. She simply stepped aside and whispered, "Anna." Hearing my name on her lips felt like a violation. Still, I walked in. The house was modest, warm, filled with small touches. A vase of fresh flowers framed photographs. Photographs of Richard, him smiling at a birthday cake, him standing on a beach, the sun behind him, him holding Margaret's hand at some dinner table. I felt my knees buckle, but I refused to sit. She gestured toward a chair. "Please, you should know the truth." The truth. The word tasted bitter. She began to talk, her voice calm, almost gentle. She spoke of trips he took with her, weekends in small towns, afternoons by the sea, nights in hotels where he held her hand like she was the only woman alive. She spoke of gifts, scarves, jewellery, books inscribed with his handwriting. She spoke of birthdays, anniversaries, moments he celebrated with her while I sat at home, waiting for him to return from what I thought were business trips. 20 years. Her words pressed against me like stones piling on my chest. 20 years of a life I never saw, 20 years of smiles and secrets, built beside mine, stealing from mine, shadowing mine. My marriage had not been the whole truth. It had been half a story. A fractured life split between two women. Rage burned inside me, hotter than anything I had ever known. I wanted to shout, to tear those photographs from the walls, to demand how she could stand before me and speak so calmly about the man who had destroyed me. But when I opened my mouth, no sound came. Only tears. Margaret lowered her eyes. He loved you too, Anna. He always said he could never leave you. But he couldn't leave me either. That sentence carved through me like a knife. He loved you too, as if love was something that could be divided, rationed, parcelled out between us. I walked out before she could say another word. The air outside was cold, sharp against my skin, but it didn't matter. The fire inside me was hotter, it was rage, and it was only beginning. That night the house felt smaller than ever, as though the walls had drawn closer to watch me unravel. I stumbled into the bedroom, Richard's scent still clinging to the pillows, the sheets, the closet full of his clothes that mocked me with their quiet loyalty. My chest was tight, my throat raw, and I could no longer hold it in. I threw myself onto the bed and screamed into the pillows until my voice tore. The sound was muffled, but the rage behind it was thunder. Anger, sorrow, humiliation, they all crashed together until I couldn't tell one from the other. I pounded the mattress with my fists like a child, sobbing until my body shook, until I thought I might never breathe again. "Why, Richard," I choked out, my voice breaking. "Why wasn't I enough? What did she give you that I didn't?" The silence that answered me was unbearable. I pressed my face into the pillow, wet with tears, and questions poured into me like poison. Had I been blind? Had I been a fool all those years, smiling at him across the dinner table, waiting for him when he said he was away on business? Was every laugh, every kiss, every whispered promise nothing more than a mask he wore to keep me from seeing? I thought of Margaret's photographs, the trips, the birthdays, the little celebrations that mirrored my own. Parallel lives running side by side, mine and hers, while he moved between them like a man playing roles on a stage. My marriage, my vows, my years of devotion. What did they mean if they were only half of his truth? The shame cut deeper than grief. Shame that the neighbours might have known, shame that whispers followed me wherever I went, shame that even my own son looked at me with questions in his eyes. I buried my face in the sheets and let the humiliation burn through me. At some point, I rose, unsteady, and stared into the mirror. My reflection was foreign. Red eyes, blotched skin, hair clinging to damp cheeks. I whispered to the woman staring back at me, "Who are you? Have you been living a lie all along?" No answer came. Only the weight of silence pressing down, reminding me that nothing I believed about my life was safe anymore. My past was cracked, my present hollow, my future uncertain. I sank to the floor by the bed, pulling Richard's jacket around me as if it could hold me together. But it couldn't. The fabric smelled of him, yes, but it also smelled of betrayal, and no amount of tears could wash that scent away. Sleep would not come. I lay in the darkness with my eyes wide open, and memories began to stir like restless ghosts. At first they came softly. Richard's laughter over dinner, the way his hand always found mine when we crossed the street, the evenings when we sat by the fire and spoke of nothing at all. I wanted to hold those memories close, but they slipped away, each one carrying a shadow I hadn't seen before. I remembered the nights he came home late, smelling faintly of cologne that wasn't his usual brand. I had asked once, and he smiled, kissed my forehead, and said, "A client gave it to me as a gift." I believed him. I remembered the phone calls he took in the garden, his voice lowered, pacing in slow circles. He told me it was work. I believed him. Now every moment twisted into something else. something darker. That weekend conference I couldn't attend because I was sick. Was he with her then? That birthday dinner he said he had to miss because of a meeting. Was he lighting her candles instead of mine? The fragments spun faster and faster, and I realized my entire past was being rewritten before my eyes. A smile that once warmed me now looked like deceit. A touch I had cherished felt like an apology for a life I didn't know existed. The man I had built my world around was crumbling, and with him, so was I. I sat up, clutching the blanket around me, rocking like a child. How did I not see? I whispered to the dark. My voice trembled. How could I have been so blind? The shame returned, sharp and cold, gnawing at me. In my mind, I saw Margaret's face, the soft lines around her eyes, the ease with which she had spoken his name. She had lived inside my memories all along, hidden in the shadows of excuses and smiles. I walked to the dresser and opened the drawer where Richard kept his watch, his cufflinks, small tokens of his life with me. I held the watch in my palm, its ticking steady, indifferent. It had been with him at dinners, at meetings, at lies. Even time itself felt like a betrayal. The fragments would not stop coming, cutting me over and over. His laughter, his lies, his late nights, his promises. All of it tangled together until I no longer knew what was real and what was performance. By the time the first light of morning slipped through the curtains, I felt hollowed out, scraped clean by memory. My life had been a story, yes, but not the story I thought it was. Daniel came to the house the next evening. I had left the table cluttered with papers, receipts, the letter, the photograph of Margaret, because part of me wanted him to see it all, to know I wasn't inventing madness in my grief. When he walked in, his eyes fell immediately on the mess. He froze, his jaw tightening. Mother, what is all this? His voice was cautious, but I could hear the edge beneath it. I pushed the photograph toward him with shaking fingers. Her name is Margaret Turner. She was with your father for years. Daniel stared at the image, his brow furrowing, his lips parting as if words might come, but none did. He looked at me, then back at the photo, and finally whispered, No, not father, not him. I wanted to protect him, to shield him from this ugliness, but there was no way back now. The truth was in his hands, staring at him with Margaret's smile. His shock turned quickly to anger. He slammed the photograph onto the table, making the papers scatter. So what? He had another life? And what does that make us? What does that make me? His eyes burned, and I saw Richard's fire in them, the same fire that had once charmed me, now twisting in our son. I reached for him, but he pulled back. Did you know, Mother? Did you ever suspect? Did you just ignore it? The question cut me deeper than any other. No, I whispered, my voice breaking. I didn't know. I swear to you, Daniel, I didn't know. He paced the room, running his hands through his hair. Everything feels like a lie now. My whole childhood, every holiday, every word he said. Was she there too? Was he splitting his life between us like some schedule? I had no answers. Only silence. And in that silence I felt the bond between us stretch, strain, nearly break. When he finally sat down, his head in his hands, I touched his shoulder gently. We still have each other, I said, though the words felt fragile, like glass that could shatter with one wrong move. He didn't reply. And in that quiet, I felt the truth sink deeper. Richard had not only betrayed me, he had betrayed his son. He had betrayed the family we thought we were. And if there had been no Daniel, no children at all, I knew the loneliness would have swallowed me whole. Even with him beside me, I felt the edge of that isolation, sharp and merciless. Secrets had broken us, and nothing would ever be the same again. I sat across from Mr. Harris again, the same desk where he had shattered my world with a single name. The blinds were half drawn, stripes of pale light cutting across his polished wood, his tidy stacks of papers, his calm face. He leaned forward, hands folded, and his voice was steady, practiced, the kind of voice that delivers bad news without flinching. "Anna," he said, "the will is legally binding. Everything Richard left is documented properly, witnessed properly. By the letter of the law, Margaret Turner is the sole heir." The words landed like stones, heavy and immovable. My hands clenched in my lap. So that's it, then? I'm nothing. After decades of marriage, after giving him my whole life, I'm left with nothing but whispers. Mr. Harris adjusted his glasses. Not necessarily. There are grounds for contesting a will, fraud, undue influence, questions of capacity. It is difficult, but not impossible. The question is whether you want to pursue it. I let out a bitter laugh, though it broke halfway into a sob. Want to? Do I want to drag my husband's memory through the courts, expose myself to more pity, more gossip? Do I want to fight for scraps when it should have been mine all along? He waited, his silence measured, giving me space. Then he said, "Anna, I've seen cases like this before. They are long, they are painful, and they are public. But if you truly believe you deserve a share of his estate, and I believe you do, you may find it worth the fight." A spark flickered in me then, faint but real. Hope, small and stubborn, trying to take root in the ashes of my grief. For the first time since the funeral, I felt something other than despair. The idea of standing in that courtroom, of saying his name aloud, of refusing to be erased, it made my blood stir. But almost immediately the doubt came rushing back. Margaret's face rose in my mind, calm, certain. 20 years she had with him. Wouldn't that count for something too? The law was cold, but the truth was colder. "I don't know if I can," I whispered. "I don't know if I have the strength." Mr. Harris's voice softened. "You don't have to decide tonight. But remember this. Richard made his choice. Now you have yours." I left the office with the papers tucked under my arm, their weight both terrifying and comforting. The fight ahead looked impossible, but for the first time since the coffin closed, I wondered if perhaps I still had a voice left to raise. The gossip grew heavier with every passing day, like a fog I couldn't escape. At first, it was only glances in the grocery store, whispers at the church door. But soon it became something larger, a chorus of quiet voices that followed me wherever I went. I walked into the bakery one morning, the same place where Richard and I used to buy fresh rolls every Sunday. The woman behind the counter smiled politely, but her eyes shifted to the man beside her as if sharing a secret. I caught a phrase, "the other woman," before she quickly cleared her throat and asked if I wanted rye or sourdough. My cheeks burned, though no one had said my name. At the post office, an old acquaintance stopped me with a hand on my arm. "Anna dear, you must be so strong through all of this," she said with a softness that cut deeper than cruelty. Her pity dripped from every word, and I wanted to shake her, to scream, "Don't you dare look at me like that. Don't you dare make me the fool in this story." But I only nodded, smiled weakly, and carried my letters out into the street where the whispers chased me. People I once called friends no longer answered my calls. Invitations that used to come regularly stopped arriving. It was as if my grief and humiliation had stained me, and no one wanted it to rub off on them. Even the women at church who once shared casseroles and gossip in my kitchen now looked past me, their conversations falling into silence when I approached. I began to feel the betrayal wasn't just Richard's, it belonged to everyone. My pain had become public property, dissected and passed along in low voices over fences and in checkout lines. What had been my private heartbreak now felt like entertainment for the town. One evening I overheard two neighbours talking outside my window. They didn't know I was there. One said, "She must have known." You can't live with a man that long and not suspect. The other replied, or maybe she chose not to know. Easier to live in the lie. Their words sliced through me, leaving me shaking in the dark. That night I sat by the window, watching the streetlights blur through my tears. I realized Richard hadn't just betrayed me in our home. He had betrayed me in front of everyone. And now, every time I stepped outside, the shame walked with me, louder than footsteps, heavier than grief. It was no longer my secret wound. It was my scarlet letter, branded for all to see. I didn't plan to see her again, but fate has a way of arranging cruel meetings. It was at the cemetery of all places. I had gone there alone, clutching fresh flowers I no longer knew whether to lay in love or in anger. As I stood by Richard's grave, I heard footsteps behind me. When I turned, there she was, Margaret Turner. Her coat buttoned to her chin, her face pale, her eyes carrying the same grief I had seen in my own mirror. For a long moment we just stared at each other, two women tied to the same ghost. Finally she spoke, her voice low, trembling at the edges. Anna. I didn't want it to be like this. The words stung. I laughed bitterly. Didn't want it. You had him for 20 years. You had his time, his promises, his money. What else was there left for me? She lowered her gaze, her hands twisting together. I had pieces of him, yes, but never the whole. He never left you. He always went back to you. I loved him, but I was always the shadow. Her confession settled over me like unexpected rain. She wasn't triumphant, she wasn't gloating. She looked tired. Tired of hiding, tired of waiting. For a moment, the anger in me faltered, replaced by something quieter, something dangerous. Compassion. I shook my head, unwilling to let it take hold. He gave you everything, Margaret. The house, the money, his years. Don't you dare pretend you were the one who suffered. She lifted her eyes and I saw tears there. Do you think it was easy? To celebrate his birthday one day and then watch him leave to spend the next with you? To have dinners that ended too soon because he had to rush back home? I loved him, but he belonged to you in ways he never belonged to me. I lived in his shadows. I always would have. The ground seemed to tilt beneath me. I wanted to hate her, to pour every ounce of fury onto her head. Yet her words slid under my skin, lodging where I couldn't dislodge them. She had suffered too. Not like me, not in the open daylight of marriage, but in the dim corners where secrets rot. I turned away, clutching the flowers tighter. We were both betrayed, I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I meant to say it aloud. For the briefest moment, standing on opposite sides of the same grave, I felt something strange. Two women bound by love, broken by the same man, caught in a sorrow neither of us had chosen. And for the first time, hatred and pity lived side by side in me. The days after Margaret's confession blurred together like rain streaking down a window, shapes without edges, time without meaning. I wandered through the house, touching the furniture, the curtains, the photographs that no longer felt like mine. Everything inside these walls belonged to another name now. Legally, I was already an intruder in my own home. At night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts twisting into endless circles. One voice whispered, "Let it go, Anna. Walk away. Take what little pride you have left and escape before the court strips you bare. What good is a house, what good is money if it chains you to a ghost?" But then another voice rose, louder, fiercer. "No, do not surrender. You are not just a discarded wife, a footnote in Richard's secret life. This was your home, your marriage, your years. Fight, not for the inheritance, but for your name, your dignity, the truth of your place in his story." The conflict sharpened with every sunrise. When I saw Margaret's face in my mind, calm and resigned, I wondered if walking away would give me peace. Yet when I thought of the whispers in town, the neighbours who pitied me, the cruel eyes that judged me, I felt fire in my veins. To surrender would be to accept their verdict. that I had been nothing more than a fool. Daniel tried to guide me, though his own wounds were raw. "Mother," he said one evening, his voice rough, "maybe it isn't worth it. Maybe we should just let her have it." Start over. I looked at him. My son, my only ally in this storm. And if I do that, Daniel, what am I left with? A suitcase of clothes and a lifetime of humiliation? No, I can't. I won't. Still, fear gnawed at me. Court meant exposure. Court meant dragging Richard's name, and mine, through the mud for strangers to judge. Court meant reliving the betrayal piece by piece in front of eyes that already believed I should have known. Could I bear that? Did I have the strength to stand under that weight? I pressed my palms together, whispering into the empty room. "Richard, you took everything from me, but you will not take my dignity." And in that moment, the choice settled inside me. I would fight. Not for the house, not for the money, for the simple, stubborn truth that I existed, that I was his wife, his partner, and I would not be erased. The decision was made, but the moment I stepped into the reality of it, the weight nearly crushed me. Preparing for court was nothing like I imagined. It wasn't strength and defiance. It was boxes of papers, endless signatures, and nights spent sifting through fragments of my life with Richard, each one sharp enough to cut. Mr. Harris guided me with calm precision. "We'll need everything," he said, his pen tapping against his notepad. "Bank records, travel receipts, proof of your shared life. Holidays, bills, photographs. Anything that demonstrates your years together as husband and wife." I almost laughed at the absurdity. Proof of my marriage? Proof of my life? Hadn't 40 years by his side been proof enough? And yet here I was, combing through albums, utility bills, joint tax returns, as though my love and loyalty needed to be itemized on legal paper. I spent hours hunched over the dining table, spreading out photographs like cards in a tragic game. Richard and I at our wedding. Richard holding Daniel as a baby. Richard standing beside me on our 20th anniversary, his arm around my shoulders, his smile wide. Evidence, they called it. To me, it was the anatomy of a broken marriage laid bare under cold lamplight. Each paper, each photograph felt heavier than it should. I found myself whispering to the images. "Were you lying even here? Was she waiting for you while you smiled for this camera?" The answers never came, only silence that pressed harder on my chest. Daniel tried to help, but I could see the pain in his eyes. He handed me bank statements, highlighting withdrawals that made no sense. "Look at this, Mother," he said quietly. "Hotel charges. Restaurants in towns he never took us to." His voice cracked, and he shoved the papers away as though they burned. "We gathered testimonies too. Old friends who would swear to Richard's devotion, to the life we built together." But even as I listened to their words, doubt seeped in. What did devotion mean if half his heart was elsewhere? The dining room filled with stacks of evidence, but to me it looked like ruins. Ruins of trust, ruins of a life I thought I knew. Preparing for court felt less like building a case and more like digging through rubble, trying to prove to strangers that I hadn't been invisible, that my years with him had mattered. And still, beneath the exhaustion and the grief, a small flame burned. Every paper I placed in those files was a declaration, not just against Margaret, not just for the court, but for myself. Richard had broken me, but I would not let him erase me. Not without a fight. The courthouse smelled of old wood and dust, the kind of place where time itself seemed to linger, waiting to witness yet another story of betrayal and loss. My heels clicked against the stone floor as Daniel walked beside me, his hand briefly brushing mine as if to steady me. I wanted to look strong, but inside I was trembling. The courtroom was smaller than I imagined, yet the moment I stepped in, it felt enormous. Every face turned toward me, the clerks, the strangers, even the curious eyes of people who had come not to care but to watch. The whispers started almost immediately, soft but unmistakable, the sound of judgment dressed in curiosity. I took my seat at the long wooden table, the documents stacked neatly before me. Mr. Harris leaned in and whispered, "Remember, Anna, say nothing until you're asked. Let me speak for you." I nodded, though my throat was dry, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. And then she walked in. Margaret. She was dressed simply, her hair pulled back, her steps measured. Behind her, her lawyer, a tall man with sharp eyes and a colder expression than I had ever seen. He glanced at me only once, and in that glance I felt his verdict already delivered. To him, I was not a woman fighting for dignity. I was an obstacle to remove. The judge entered, robes swaying, and the room rose to its feet. The tension thickened, every breath heavy with anticipation. My heart pounded so loudly I thought others might hear it. The proceedings began with formality, names, dates, the reading of the will. Hearing Richard's name spoken in that detached tone made my stomach twist. He was no longer my husband here. He was only the deceased, reduced to ink and law. When Margaret's lawyer spoke, his words were like polished knives, calm, calculated, slicing away at my claim before I had even opened my mouth. He painted Margaret as devoted, as chosen, as the rightful heir. Every syllable seemed designed to erase me, to make me smaller, until I wondered if the bench I sat on might swallow me whole. And yet, beneath the shame and fear, something held. Determination. I straightened my back, lifted my chin, and fixed my eyes on the judge. I told myself I belong here. I will not vanish into silence. As the first hearing ended, no decisions made, I left the courtroom shaken but standing. The whispers still followed me, but I no longer cared. For the first time in weeks, I felt it clear in my chest. I was small, yes, but I was not broken. Not yet. The weeks that followed blurred into endless paperwork and meetings, but then, slowly, painfully, the truth began to unspool. Mr. Harris slid a folder across his desk one morning, his eyes sharper than usual. "Anna," he said, "you need to see this." Inside were bank statements, some I recognized and others I had never laid eyes on. Accounts in Richard's name, accounts I hadn't known existed. Transfers, regular and generous, made out to Margaret Turner. Monthly payments, gifts disguised as consulting fees, deposits into an account in her name that grew larger with every passing year. My breath caught. For decades, Richard had been building a second life not with words, not just with his time, but with money. Our money. Then came the letters. Dozens of them, tucked away in folders Margaret's lawyer reluctantly produced when compelled by the court. Richard's handwriting spilled across the pages, intimate and tender, promises, apologies, declarations. "I wish I could give you more. You deserve everything I have." Words he had never written to me, at least not in that tone. I read them with shaking hands, each sentence slicing another piece from the heart I had once given him whole. But amid the pain, Mr. Harris pointed out something else. "Notice the dates," he said, tapping the pages with his finger. "Some of these transactions, some of these letters, they happened when Richard was already under medical care. His clarity, his capacity may have been in question." The spark in me flared again. Cracks. Small but real. The will, so absolute when first read, might not be as unshakable as Margaret's lawyer claimed. If Richard had been compromised, if his judgment had been clouded, perhaps the law would listen. I clung to that possibility with trembling hands. It wasn't just about money, it was about truth. About showing that Richard had not been the flawless man people whispered about. He had deceived me, deceived us all. And maybe in the end, he hadn't even been in full command of the choices he made. Still, the revelations cut deep. I stared at the numbers on the page, the letters filled with tender lies, and felt rage coil tighter in my chest. He had given her so much, money, words, pieces of himself I never knew he could spare. And yet, he left me with nothing but a fight. As I closed the folder, I whispered under my breath, "Richard, you hid everything, but maybe now, The truth will finally betray you. The final day in court arrived with a heaviness that made it hard to breathe. The air itself felt charged, as if it too was waiting for judgment. I sat at the long wooden table, my hands folded tightly together, Daniel beside me, Mr. Harris quietly arranging papers we both knew might not change the outcome. Across from us sat Margaret, calm, composed, her lawyer sharp and cold, ready to claim victory. The judge's entrance silenced the room. Every shuffle, every cough, every whisper vanished into stillness. My heart pounded so loud it filled my ears, drowning out the world. I stared at the bench, praying for words that might grant me back even a fragment of what I had lost. The judge spoke slowly, deliberately, as though each word carried the weight of a stone. He acknowledged the years of my marriage, the decades I had given to Richard. He acknowledged the pain and humiliation that had brought me to this place. And then he shifted, his voice steady, merciless. The will is valid. The estate, including the house, accounts, and vehicle, is awarded in full to Margaret Turner. The words struck like blows, each syllable another crack in my chest. I gripped the edge of the table, fighting to hold myself upright. Margaret's lawyer lowered his eyes in a gesture of victory. Margaret herself glanced at me, not triumphant, not cruel, just final. Daniel's hand closed around mine, but even his touch couldn't hold me together. The room spun, the walls pressed in. My marriage, my home, my years, everything had been weighed, measured, and dismissed. I was nothing more than a footnote in legal language. When the gavel struck, the sound echoed like thunder. It wasn't just an ending, it was an erasure. My fight, long and exhausting, had ended in defeat. We rose to leave. I kept my head high, though my body screamed to collapse. The silence around me was unbearable, filled with eyes that watched but did not speak. Pity, judgment, curiosity. It all pressed against me, but I would not let them see me fall. Not here. Outside the courthouse, the sun glared bright, cruel in its indifference. Reporters asked questions, voices buzzing like flies. I walked past them without a word, Daniel shielding me as best he could. Only when the car door closed and the world was shut out did I allow myself to breathe. A shallow, broken breath. Defeat had come, official and final. And in that silence, I realized grief had found a new shape, emptier, colder, and heavier than before. When the courtroom doors closed behind me for the last time, I expected to feel crushed. I had lost, completely, undeniably. The house, the money, the car, all of it signed over to Margaret Turner as though I had never existed. And yet, as I stepped into the open air, I felt something strange, lighter. Perhaps it was because there was nothing left to lose. The fight was finished, the verdict sealed. The weight of anticipation, of hope and dread twisting together every morning had fallen away. What remained was quiet. Painful, yes. Empty, yes. But quiet. Daniel walked beside me, his hand brushing mine. "I'm sorry, Mother," he said softly. But I shook my head. "Don't be. It's done. And I'm still here." The words surprised me as they left my lips, but they rang true. For months I had been living inside Richard's shadow, inside his lies, inside a war between what I thought my life was and what it had become. Now, finally, I stood in the open. When I returned to the house that no longer belonged to me, I moved through the rooms without the same agony. Yes, it hurt to know I would leave soon, that every corner had been claimed by another name. But it no longer felt like mine anyway. It had been his monument of lies, and now it was time to let it go. That evening I sat on the porch as the sun set, painting the sky with colours Richard would never see again. For the first time I didn't think of him with rage or sorrow. I thought of myself, Anna Coleman. A woman who had given her life, yes, but who still had life left to give. The neighbours' whispers no longer mattered. Their pity, their judgment, it was only noise. They hadn't lived my story. They hadn't carried my pain. and they would not define what came next. I breathed deeply, the air cool and sharp. I was empty-handed, yes, but in that emptiness there was room to build, room to grow, room to exist, without the weight of his betrayal. I whispered to the quiet evening, I am still here, and that is enough. And for the first time in months, maybe years, I believed it. I was lighter, freer, stronger than before. Richard's choices had taken everything he could, but what remained was mine alone, myself, my truth, my beginning. Looking back now, I see the story differently. For a long time, betrayal felt like the end of me, as though Richard's choices had shattered every piece of my existence beyond repair. I thought I had been erased, stripped of love, of dignity, of a future. But slowly, through the grief and the shame, I began to understand something else. Betrayal is not the end of life. It is the beginning of a new truth. There were nights I believed I would never rise again. Nights when the silence of the house pressed so hard against me I could barely breathe. I screamed into pillows, I tore through memories, I cursed his name until the echoes grew hoarse, and yet, even then, I survived. Every morning, though my heart felt broken, I still rose from bed. I still put one foot in front of the other. Survival has a rhythm, even when you think you've forgotten how to hear it. The whispers of society once cut me deeper than Richard's lies. People thought they knew the story. Some pitied me, some judged me, some whispered that I must have looked the other way. But their voices no longer matter. They weren't in my home, they weren't in my heart, they weren't in the shadow of the truth I had to face. They didn't walk the path I walked. Margaret's face still comes to me sometimes, in dreams or in moments of quiet. I don't hate her the way I once did. She was not the thief of my life. Richard gave it freely, divided himself between us. She, too, lived in shadows, waiting for promises that never fully came. We were both betrayed, though in different ways. That is a strange truth, one I never thought I'd accept. What matters now is not what Richard did, but what I will do. I have lost the house, the money, the possessions. All of it has slipped through my fingers. But in losing it, I have gained something I didn't know I had. Myself, my strength, my voice, my ability to begin again without illusions. There is no erasing the past, no rewriting the years. But there is tomorrow, and tomorrow is mine, no matter how small or uncertain it may be. When I think of Richard now, I don't ask why anymore. The answers don't matter. What matters is the lesson etched into me through fire and sorrow. When they take everything from you, sometimes they give you back the only thing that matters: yourself. What part of this story touched you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to read them. If this story felt close to your heart, give it a like, subscribe if you want to be part of a space where real stories matter. Got a couple more minutes? Check out the next story. It's also about the things we rarely say out loud.